of Appeals on Tuesday, February 2nd, 2023. Kelsey, could we get a roll call, please?
Okay, Member Straczynski?
Present.
Member Beck?
Here.
Member Yablon?
Present.
Member Zaransky is absent. Member Hendrick?
Here.
Vice Chair Bay?
Here.
And Chair Culliford.
Here.
Okay, that's 6. We have a quorum present.
Thank you. Who else is with us this evening?
Okay, so myself, Kelsey Faywell, Planner 2, Staff Liaison to the ZBA is here. We also have our new Student Representative, David Risco Juarez here. We have our more seasoned Student Representative, Jeremy Bach here. We also have Council Liaison Member, or Council Liaison, Andres Tapia, and City Forester, Ben Miller here.
Thank you.
And no manager.
Have my colleagues had an opportunity to review the minutes from January 5th?
Yes.
Yes.
I will entertain a motion.
I would make a motion to adopt the minutes as presented in the packet from the meeting on January 5th.
I'd like them, okay.
Second, and then your comment.
I would like to second the motion, but I have a correction to be made.
Yes.
And the correction is that my name was left off of abstaining from the minutes at the last meeting. So if my name could be added to
Her
the,
name needs to be added as an abstention on the approval of the minutes for the January 5th meeting.
Got it, okay.
Okay?
Do we need to move to approve the
We-
minutes
we-
as amended?
Yes, we'll approve the minutes as amended.
I'd make that motion.
Thank you. We'll let Kelsey pick this up. Let her catch up first, then we'll entertain the second.
All right.
And the second on that is
I would second that motion.
Member Hendrick. All those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed? The ayes. Anybody abstaining? No one abstaining. Member Beck, were you at the meeting of the 5th?
No, but on the 5th, yes.
Yes, okay. You were not here at the 19th?
Yes, and I
Okay.
can confirm and attest that I did read the minutes and watch the video.
Okay. So the minutes of the 5th have been approved. And has everyone had an opportunity to either review the minutes of the 19th?
Yes.
I'll entertain a motion.
Member Hendrick would make a motion to adopt the minutes as presented in the packet.
Second.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Nobody abstaining? The ayes have it. The publication date for this meeting was January 18th, 2023. Is there any business from the public for items to discuss other than the application that is before us this evening? Not seeing any. Our old business this evening is application 2022-VAR-030, the property at 178 Prospect Avenue. The appellants are Charles E. and Lauren M. Wood. Kelsey, do you have a presentation?
Yes, I do, Chair. And quickly, could I get clarification as to who was a second to Member Hendrick on the 19th minutes?
I think it was me.
Member Bay, Vice Chair Bay.
Okay, thank you. Okay, seems like it's like a Friday the 13th type scenario. There's no keyboard up here. So I will be presenting from over here, and I'm going to steal your mic, Davis. I am so sorry. Okay, so this is 178 Prospect Avenue, ZBA case 2022 VAR 030. This is at the corner of Prospect and Forest Avenue. Some project background. So this case originally appeared before the ZBA at the last meeting on January 19th, 2022. The applicants are Charles E. and Lauren M. Wood. The proposal is to construct a garage with office space attached to the existing home by breezeway. It's located within the R4 Lakefront Overlay District zoning district. And the existing home and detached garage were constructed in 1910. So before you guys on the January 19th ZBA meeting, The requests were pretty much the same, only slight changes. They wanted to exceed the maximum allowable floor area of 5,280 square feet by 870 square feet for a total floor area of 6,150 square feet. That request has remained the same. The request that has changed is to exceed the maximum allowable rear yard coverage of 630 square feet, which is 30%. This has decreased to 310 square feet. Originally it was 323. So you're looking at a 13 square foot difference, and that is a 14.8% increase, and the total area of rear yard coverage is 940 square feet. The removal of one heritage tree, a 30-inch diameter breast height white oak, that request has remained the same. Here is an aerial of the lot. It's a corner lot with 2 front yards, 1 side yard along the east, and 1 35-foot rear yard along the south. Here is a view from Prospect Avenue, and here's a view from Forest Avenue. You can see this is the rear of the home. So around here is where they're looking to do their addition and breezeway. Here's a survey of the existing home. And again, this is a 40-foot front yard, a 40-foot front yard, a 12-foot minimum side yard, and a 35-foot rear yard. This existing garage is non-conforming slightly. Within the rear yard, detached garages are allowed to encroach up to 3 feet within this area. And you can see the survey is about 2.5 feet away from those setbacks. So this is the previous proposed site plan. It's about 12 feet away from that side yard. And this is the breezeway connecting a garage with an office space, and they have this rear driveway, and the rear driveway is the reason for the rear yard coverage request. This is the revised plans that have come before everyone today. There were some concerns with the heritage tree. The applicants have moved it approximately 3.4 feet to the west. So you can kind of see between those two that originally it was in line with that breezeway. Now there's a little bit of a jet out to the west. And they also have a paver patio and a covered porch right here. I will note that the addition and the garage are not permitted to encroach past this 40-foot setback line right here, but this covered porch is allowed to encroach up to 8 feet into this setback. So this is the proposed rendering. This is the floor area analysis. So again, they are within allowable bonus FAR. However, since variations are needed for the rear yard coverage, that therefore renders bonus FAR ineligible because you're not allowed to have any variations with a bonus FAR project. So that kicks it into a maximum FAR variation. And they're over that by 870 square feet. So the maximum bonus is 6,180 square feet. This proposed project is about 30 feet below that bonus allowance. Here's this rear yard analysis. Again, so this is an older slide. So right here it has a little bit of a jut out. And they're looking at a 940 square foot area, 310 square feet. This is where the approximate heritage tree is, so now that they've moved it approximately 3.4 feet to the west. I will say that the memo provided by the city forester for the original meeting contended that there were concerns with this tree being damaged mortally, and that due to the development and the proximity to this development, the heritage tree removal would be required. This proposed movement does not change city forester's opinion in that a heritage tree removal request would be needed. This is the applicant's alternate site plan. This was a newer plan that was included in the packet. This is a 20-foot radius of the FAR of the heritage tree. And here's another one they provided with a 35-foot clearance of that heritage tree. So you can see that porch encroaches a little bit into the front yard. And this, you're getting both the addition, which would require a variation, and then you're also looking at that porch and that patio encroaching into the front yard. Okay, so the city forester is here to answer any questions about their memo. Again, the city forester's position still stands that the proposed development would still require approval of a heritage tree removal. And there was additional public comment received in between the previous meeting and this meeting. That was from the neighbors directly to the east of the property at 162 Prospect. They provided written comment. They also submitted public testimony at that public hearing on the 19th. Okay, so just a summary, it is 2 Chapter 150 zoning variations. One is to exceed the maximum allowable floor area of 5,280 square feet by 870 square feet for a total floor area of 6,150 square feet. The second revised variation is to exceed the maximum allowable rear yard coverage of 630 square feet by 310 square feet, 14.8% of that rear yard coverage area, for a total area of 940 square feet. So for those two requests, the zoning board should use the zoning code, section 150 standards of approval. And then for the chapter 94 heritage tree removal, to allow removal of a heritage tree, a 30-inch diameter white oak, the zoning board should use the chapter 94 standards of approval. I will point out that we have reached out to Corporation Council about how to vote in order of these. The zoning board retains the right to vote upon the heritage tree first, and then the zoning board, the zoning variation second, or to vote them all at once. Conditioned on that. Okay, so if there are any questions, I will gladly take them.
Any questions for Kelsey or for Ben?
Question for the
Vice Chair?
Wait for him to get up to the podium.
Go ahead, sir.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just curious, Ben, did the change in the ask affect your opinion in any way? I know you still don't support it, but does it increase the odds of the tree potentially surviving? If so, by how much approximately? Or is there any way of even guessing at that?
It's, of course, difficult to give a probability to it. My looking forward into the permitting process, we're talking about, if my measurements are correct, something like 13 feet from the trunk is what the extra distance would get. Once you factor in the space they're going to need to actually excavate that foundation, the overdig to form the foundation, I think you're talking about maybe 5 feet away, in which case you're talking about compaction adjacent to excavation, adjacent to this tree. So I don't think that's enough distance to reasonably expect the tree to survive.
So you answered, so in short, you would still expect that the tree would end up having to be removed?
I think so.
Okay, thank you.
Member Hendrick?
During the presentation and in the packet, there are alternative proposals, not preferred, but they're presented. One of them has the garage being 20 feet away, and one has the garage being 35 feet away. What's likelihood of survival with either of those proposals?
So certainly greater than the proposal as submitted. I'll be honest, this is the first time I've seen these.
Okay.
My initial comments were to suggest a 20-foot distance
Okay.
between the trunk of this tree and the foundation. Then I think there is a viable, there's at least a chance of this tree surviving with preservation measures put in place upon construction. 35 feet, absolutely better, but I don't think that's reasonable, practicable, or practical, given what they're looking to get out of this construction and balancing that with the need to preserve quality trees on this property. So I feel that 20 is a good, reasonable expectation here.
Thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions for staff at this time?
I mean, I guess I'm not
Member
really sure
Beck?
what we're voting on. You're examining, are we going to,
Well, there will be two, we'll hear from the applicant and other folks, but there are two things to vote on. The one will be the removal of the heritage tree request. The second will be the variations that have been requested with regards to the size and rear yard coverage.
so the 20-foot setback would not require a heritage tree removal permit?
No, that is something that I would feel that we could handle in the permitting process and would not need extra relief.
So if we vote down the heritage tree variation, do they then have to come back with a new proposal, or is this sufficient?
They will, because
Yeah.
there's a new request.
Right.
There'd be a new request encroaching into that front yard.
All right, that clarifies, thank you.
And we would need to revise the approval order accordingly and get a revised site plan for that.
And then it would also need to be renoticed.
Would that need to be renoticed?
No, I would have to double check, but with the patio, it's allowed an 8-foot encroachment. This plan shows a 4-foot encroachment with that covered patio, so I don't believe it would need to be renoticed.
Okay,
But the third one would.
Yeah.
yes. Any other questions at this time? We'll ask the, thank you. We'll ask the applicant's team. And you were sworn in, and this is a continuation of the hearing, sir, so if you just please provide your name so we can all hear it.
Mark Lichtman, attorney at law.
Thank you.
The last hearing, we dealt with the standards. I want to just talk a little bit about a number of matters, but the first one is that the excavation for the garage, okay, there's only going to be a 4-foot dig because it's going to go to the frost line for the foundation. Okay, so there's not really the necessity to have that much of an overdig at all. And so I think that that's something this board has to take into consideration. There are 60 trees and shrubs on this property, and excluding the heritage tree, which we are going to try to do everything we can do to save it, and we're willing to listen to the city forester on any ways to mitigate the damage done, and we will do that, because I will tell you that I was on this board for about 15 years, and there were people who built homes and did additions next to these trees, and these trees survived, including that happening to me personally. But there is only one other tree that is being removed as part of this. It's in the center lot, it's tree 50. This case is a very sensible zoning variation. This is a 112-year-old house that's being brought up to today's standards. The problem that you have when you buy a house that nobody realized when it's 112 years old, you have a 5-foot basement. You have, in addition to that, a lot of incurable economic obsolescence. You have, for example, small bathrooms. You have small closets. You have, sometimes one bedroom can be big and the other two could be small. So when you're looking at this, and it's not a 5,000 square foot house. It's really a 4,500 square foot house because it includes the garage, which is being removed and then replaced. But this 4,500 square foot house has a lot of unusable, dysfunctional space. Throughout this entire neighborhood, the city, the zoning board of appeals in the past has granted zoning variations and the removal of trees. When I was on the board, about a block away at 1765 Lake, David Small, I don't know if anybody knows him, but he was on the school board here, came before us for a 3-car garage, and we looked at having a 3-car garage on Lake, and we said to him, why don't you connect it by a breezeway to show that this is really part of the house? And it came out to be a much better project by having that breezeway. And 186 Hazel was a very grand old timber home, a beautiful house, and there was no way for this property owner to have a 3-car garage on that lot. There's just no other place other than to put it in the front yard. And we granted them a zoning variation for a 3-car garage and a small breezeway to it. There's another property, and I could go through others and bore you to death on it, but the 286 Hazel, we had someone, it was an old coach house. It has carriage doors. It's a pretty cool looking house. And we granted them a zoning variation for a 2-car garage. This is really in accordance with the public policy of the city of Highland Park to preserve these older homes and to make them useful. Now, at the last meeting, I think there may have been a misconception here that that my clients never spoke to the neighbors beforehand, and they did, okay? And they have spoken since, and I don't think that there's any kind of resolution. This proposal is different from the first proposal because it is 18 and a half feet from the property line. 16 and a half feet from the property line. and is approximately 11 and a half feet from the 30-inch heritage tree. And as if you saw that picture that the city forester provided regarding the diameter of this heritage tree, it's just barely at 30 inches. Depending how you measured it, it could maybe be a little bit under, but it is just barely a heritage tree, okay? But there is only one tree that is being removed, okay? And I'm going to pass out the tree surveys to everyone. If you could pass that around. Now, I'll wait till everybody gets it. This is also, I believe, part of the package. So, is everybody, oh, okay. So tree 50, which is in the center of the yard that has no impact on anybody, is the only tree that is planned to be removed, and is an 8-inch hawthorn. That is not a key tree or a heritage tree. Okay? It is neither. That is the only tree that is planned to be taken away. And my clients are going to do whatever they can do to save that tree. The objector is relying on the city's forester report, but we feel that that is speculative. Nobody knows how the trees that are along the eastern line of the property, how they're going to survive. Okay? But there's a very strong probability that when you're 16 and a half feet from the property line, okay, that these trees could very easily survive, or 12 feet is in certain areas of this addition. As I said earlier, the foundation for the garage is to the frost line, and this foundation is what is recommended by the architects, so that this garage will last for hopefully eternity. The other trees is tree 54 that will stay. That is an 11-inch American elm that is on the border, and there will be no impact. There won't be any digging going on around there. The next one is tree 55, which is a 20-inch Norway that is on the border and will have no impact, because there's no digging going on around there. Tree number 56 is a 25-inch American elm that the neighbor states is on their property. But according to the condition of the tree by the forester who we hired, that tree is rated in a 4 condition or below average. And there's been dieback and it's overtopped. But that is the objector's tree. Trees 57, 58, 59, and 60 are removable shrubs, but our client intends to keep them, as is tree 61, which is a magnolia tree. That is not a key tree or a heritage tree. The neighbor has talked about privacy, but there is a 6-foot fence between the two property lines. And there is no, there's no wall of arborvitae that's going up there, but these are trees that are within my client's property line, and they're intending to keep them. They're doing whatever they can do to make sure that there is going to be a minimal construction impact. Because of the fence, no one can see. My clients can't look into their house, and their house can't look into ours. And they have an odd-shaped lot. They have like a triangular-shaped lot, and their house goes along the border of my client's house. But nobody can see into either, my clients can't see into their house and vice versa. If the neighbor wants some privacy from the trees, we could always talk about putting up arborvitae, but on one hand, they say they want the shade, and arborvitae would shade their house, or or they want sun, and we really don't know, but the amount of impact of removing that hawthorn tree has no effect on them, and if the heritage tree does die, that will have, we believe, a minimal impact. The neighbors talked about summertime shade, increased cooling costs, lawn watering, and the green privacy, but right now, we intend to keep all those trees. We have no evidence, there's no data as to whether or not these trees will cause cooling costs or whatever to go up or down, or watering or anything like this. Then there has been some discussion regarding asphalt and water runoff. Well, this driveway and this house is going to comply with all drainage requirements. And the driveway will slope towards the street most likely. But there will be adequate drainage on our client's side of the property. This tree is not has no material detriment to the public welfare, use and enjoyment or development of the property or of the other properties in the area, because it's very speculative as to whether or not it will die. There are no practical alternatives that the architect is also going to discuss. This is one of the most expensive and exclusive areas of the city of Highland Park and of the North Shore. We actually looked at garages. You can go on the Lake County Assessor's website, and you can actually pull up an address for a whole neighborhood. And I literally checked with a block around where my clients are, the sizes of all these garages, and I gave everybody a garage study. And the average size of a garage was 783 square feet. There's a house that's like 4 houses away that has a 4-car garage. This garage right now is about 460 square feet, and it's only going to be 576 square feet. The increase in the size of it, this garage, is really due to the fact that the world has changed. My clients have electric cars, and that is going to be the future. They need gardening equipment. I don't know if anybody drove to the back of their house, but, you know, they don't even have a place to put their lawn furniture, okay? And, you know, there may be things that they want to store. And because it's in a corner lot, what you want to do is you want to make sure that that lot always looks good, and they intend to take great care of this. But there's no other practicable place to place this, okay? The plans proposed by the objector, as the architect will get into, would cause the property to depreciate. It would add no contributory value to this property because it's too far from the house, and it's just not going to be useful. The option one that they proposed was moving it 15 feet, but that then destroys their entire backyard because all of a sudden you have one side of the yard, then you have the garage and the home office, okay, in the middle, and then you have another part of the yard. The kids, they're expecting a baby, their kids won't be able to really play in that backyard. There just won't be any. It wouldn't make any sense to do option one. Option two wouldn't work because this wouldn't be considered an accessory structure, and you would need a zoning variation, and the garage would be too far away. And option three that they came up with, the garage is too far from the house. And, you know, my clients, they have looked this over and studied this plan with a very talented architect and have come up with a very elegant plan. And this zoning, not this exact zoning board, but prior zoning boards have in the past allowed larger garages in the front and with breezeways. Mr. Dunn is going to talk about the daylight plane, and it will have no impact whatsoever. This is going to be a one-story building. Now, at the height of that building, at the ridge of the roof, it's 18 and a half inches tall, is going to, 18 and a half feet, tall, is going to be 28.5 feet from the property line. Okay, so it is going to have a very minimal impact on them. These are one-story buildings. The garages I indicated earlier will be 16 and a half feet from the property line and 11 and a half feet from the heritage tree, and the excavation will be at the frost line, so that this property will stand the test of time. There is no other reasonable use other than to put it there. This is a 5,000 square foot, 4,500 square foot house with small closets, odd-sized bedrooms, small bathrooms, and really not a floor plan that you would see in a modern house. We're asking for a simple two-car garage and work area, and these kinds of variations have been granted before. In fact, in that neighborhood, I think Lou Nathanson wanted I don't know if he's appeared before this board, but he's an architect, and he wanted to have a garage in the back and like a studio, and we granted him that. This is actually, my clients did the neighbors a favor by buying this house and keeping it, as well as the city, because they made a major investment in this house and a major investment in saving a grand old home. But if every other buyer that wanted to buy this house, their objection was that this was not a 5,000 square foot house. The value was really in the land. And any other person would have bought this house, and they would have pushed it back so they didn't have to get a front yard variation. And this house would be farther back, it would be taller, and there would be more bulk. But my clients, they saved it, and I think that they should be entitled to have the reasonable use and enjoyment of the house. This is, quite frankly, a great deal for the homeowner next door, because they're assured they're only going to have a one-story house. If they're concerned about shade and privacy and everything like that, well, I mean, theoretically, if this could be built as a matter of right, without any variations, somebody could put up, I think, what, a 26-foot structure? 32-foot structure here. So they're really getting, I think, my clients have really done whatever they can do to have the minimum amount done to meet their game plan. This is a reasonable use. I don't think anybody could say that a two-car garage is a reasonable use. The average size of the garages, because I went around about a whole block from the subject property, where the average size garage was 783 square feet. And this is a 576 detached two-car garage. Now, the ZBA has allowed and encouraged landowners to do this variation before in front yards. This is a very unusual circumstance, and that is but for this lot coverage, okay, and the heritage tree, we would not be in front of you. It is speculation as to whether or not any of these other trees are going to die, and whether or not the heritage tree is going to die. But at the end of the day, only one tree is planned to be removed out of 60. And it's a much better deal for the city to keep these grand old homes. But if you deny the variation, okay, people are going to say, it's a little too dangerous to invest in an older home in Highland Park. We're probably better off tearing it down. And that's sort of a message that this could send. But the neighbors next door, if they ever want to do something with their house, they may need a zoning variation because they have a corner lot that's more odd-shaped than ours. The other thing that I want to say is that this, I suspect, is going to be a contentious hearing. My clients have expressed a willingness to get along with their neighbors afterwards. They've proposed what they feel is a very, very reasonable game plan to get what they want done. And I would hope that the zoning board would look at past precedent. They would look at the public policy, the historical significance of keeping these grand old homes, and grant my client its zoning variation. And again, we did read the record, we did deal with the standards in the packet last week, the other standards. Mr. Dunn,
You may come up, sir.
does anybody have any questions? Oh, wait, yeah, okay.
Bob, or we can wait till the architect's done.
Well, do you want to ask me? Maybe if I
up
get,
to
no.
you.
Okay. If I don't know, he can answer it.
No, I mean, I think I have questions for you.
Okay.
So the term practicable, that, I think is going to be the crux of the issue, in my opinion. You addressed it somewhat, but I think the elephant in the room is, even in your packet, we have alternatives, and you're not proposing them, but there are alternatives.
Well, we looked at everything.
And you list out pros and cons.
Yeah.
Why shouldn't your clients be the one to bear the burden? So it may not be the perfect solution, but why shouldn't they be the ones to bear the burden if a neighbor has an issue with it?
Well, first of all, it's a heritage, if this is a heritage tree, it's a 30-inch tree. It is on my client's property, and my client is trying to save this tree, and if they can, and hopefully they will be able to save it. But to move it back would make no practical or useful sense, for everybody here would then just be wasting their time. The reality here is that any tree that dies because of this, and they're going to work hard to save all these trees, okay, because some of them are just protected trees, okay, will be replanted. And good forestry practices are that if you do remove a tree, you're replacing it inch for inch. So as these older trees die off, there are going to be more trees that are planted that are going to be providing shade and light like that. And, I don't know if anybody was here when they had all that Dutch elm disease a long time ago, but there were so many Dutch elm trees, there were so many elm trees that came down, or even more recently, the ash borer trees. So we feel that we're going to be engaging in great forestry practices by adding trees to the property that's going to benefit them in the long run as other trees die.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with a lot of what you say, and I understand a lot of what you say.
Yeah.
I guess my issue is, I think about even the plan you've come to us today with, and think about, well, couldn't they just even move it another foot over? And, I mean, if the answer to that question is yes, then to me, the standard isn't going to be met, because there are alternatives to your plan then, and the tree's likelihood of survival will obviously go up the further away you get away from it.
Well, you don't know that, though. I mean, they could stay, they could live, forever. And I have a heritage tree, an oak heritage tree, 2 of them, okay, on my property, and we did digging all over the place, and they're still dropping acorns. So there's no guarantee that this tree is going to die, okay? We are going to be using as many resources as we can to keep it, but this is really the most practical solution. It really is. Otherwise, it just doesn't make any sense to build it. It really doesn't.
Can we have the foresters?
Can I add,
Follow-up also, sorry.
would the forester care to make some comments?
Questions first, or?
Go ahead.
I just wanted to hear your response to that.
A couple points I'd like to make. One, yes, we are dealing in probabilities here, and the further the structure is away from the tree, the higher the probability of survival. Yes, you could build right next to it. No, there's not a high probability of survival. If I could go back, and I'll apologize for not defining some terms I was using, overdig, That is lateral excavation that needs to be done to frame a foundation, not vertical. The roots of these trees are within the first 24 inches of soil, so anything beyond 24 inches is moot. So you go down 24 inches, the roots are gone. Flat, plain and simple. Overdig, so wherever that foundation is, you have to go further to frame, please, correct me if I'm wrong, sir, this is your realm, not mine. You have to frame the foundation, so wherever the foundation's gonna be, you have to go further away from it to make up that space and form the foundation of the structure. So that is more distance and more encroachment on the tree beyond where the actual foundation resides. And one thing that carries over from the last meeting, the 60 trees and shrubs on the property, I do want to point out that 2/3 of those are taxpayer-maintained trees. They reside within the parkway on Lake Avenue and on Prospect, or excuse me, Forest Drive and Prospect. They are not on private property. And really, with any development, consideration for the trees on private property is expected. When we're looking at the trees here, we've got 4 key trees under city ordinance, which are not part of these deliberations, but I think it's important to keep in mind where they are relative to construction, and 1 heritage tree. The 4 key trees are all immediately adjacent to the existing driveway. They're going to be impacted by construction. Any redo of that driveway, they're right there. The foundation of the new structure is immediately next to the heritage tree. It's going to be impacted one way or the other. When you push it away, there's a chance of it surviving. So those are the quality trees on this property. The Norway maples, they are protected, and they are expected, that effort is made. More effort is expected the higher you go up that chain, and we're talking about the heritage tree here now.
May I ask,
Please.
is there a distance from the heritage tree at which you would not be putting before us the removal request?
The rule of thumb is 1 foot for every inch of trunk diameter, which puts you at 30 feet. A reasonable expectation can be made of preserving that tree at 20 feet, in my opinion,
Okay.
which is why I've stuck to that number since the beginning here. Their arborist says without any construction, the closest they would encroach is 15. I think that's not conservative enough. Last point I'll make is a number of issues have been brought both with neighbors and by myself with this development. And by pushing it 20 feet, you get distance from the heritage tree. You would reduce impervious surface, which I know stormwater management is a matter for permitting, but reduced impervious surface reduces stormwater issues. You gain a buffer between this property and the adjacent property. You gain a backyard for this property, maybe not a rear yard, but an additional yard on the east end, which I think is a benefit, where screening can go, and you have a buffer between the two with vegetation or whatever you choose. And you mitigate any shading issues. It's mentioned in the footnotes of the alternative plan that was submitted the first time around that there was a concern about shading for the family room from this structure. I don't see any reason why there wouldn't be a similar problem between this structure and the adjacent residence, given the height is the same. Maybe a little bit for distance, but I don't have those measurements. I'll let the architect speak to that.
Any other questions?
So in short, Ben, what you're saying is that 20 feet would be the absolute minimum where you would feel comfortable recommending, not necessarily supporting this, because it would no longer be an issue of whether we remove the tree. You'd allow the permitting process to go forward without the necessity of looking at the tree.
Yes.
All right, and then I have a question for Mr. Lippman. Mr. Lippman, you made the statement a little while ago that you said there's no guarantee that this tree will die.
There isn't.
And I think what we need to look at is the opposite of that statement. There's no guarantee that it will live. And the reality is, from a legal perspective, you're here asking us for the right to remove the tree. And we have to rule on that based on assuming that you're going to be removing the tree, because that's what we're giving you the permission to do, which means we have to apply the standards.
Sure.
And, you know, again, going back to, as Will pointed out, and as the neighbor's attorney, Mr. Meek, and I think I pointed out last week, the word that the city council has chosen is practicable. And that, as we've kind of repeated numerous times, it means there's no other doable alternative. Not that there's, this is the best alternative, the worst alternative, it's just, is there something else that's doable? And
Well-
clearly there is.
Well, I mean, first of all, it depends on how you look at the word practicable. And if you go and you put this tree so that the structure is 20 feet away from it, okay, you've pushed it so far that it's going to destroy the rest of their lot, because you're going to look, if you look at it, you're going to have a big open space on the eastern part, and then you're going to have an area over here along Forest that's going to be their second backyard, and it's going to stick out like a sore thumb. And then what you're going to have is, if you look at it spatially, the people who are on Forest and who drive down Forest and look at this, they're going to say, why did these people put this addition in the middle of the lot? And it's going to be, well, there is a tree. And this is an addition that's going to last, you know, hopefully for a very, very, very long time. And, you know, if we can't save it, okay, then we can't. But I don't think it is practicable to put this in the middle of this lot and destroy their backyard. I really don't.
I get your point, but I think you are, and I am parsing words, but that's part of our job.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think what you're really saying, it's not practical.
It's not practicable.
Well, no,
To put
if
it-
you look up the dictionary definition of the word practical, it's not that it's the best alternative, it's not that
Well,
it's...
and then what you could do is you could have a city, if that's going to be the way that, you know, it does it, that people will go, and what they'll do is they'll just tear down these grand old homes.
That's a valid point.
You know, and so but it is, I believe it is practicable to put it, and these other options are not practicable. And I think the architect will also agree with me on this.
I guess what I'm asking you is that legally, how can, if we use the correct dictionary definition for the word practicable, how can we grant the removal? Because I don't see it.
Because I don't think it's
if we're
practical.
assuming- Well, but if we're assuming that I'm correct, that the definition of the word practicable is doable as opposed to makes the most sense or the most...
Well, I would look at it
desirable.
more as useful. And I would say that the definition of practicable is that it makes it impracticable to put this in the middle of the yard. Clearly does it. So, you know, I mean, there would be no reason for them to put this in the middle of the yard.
But couldn't you move it just a foot over, even farther from your current, I mean, you say that, but we're parsing the word of
Okay,
whether it's
move it
doable.
over a foot? Would you move it over a foot? Okay. Does anybody have any more questions for me?
Sir, were you here 2 weeks ago?
I was.
Thank you. Just provide your name so they have it on the recording.
Corey Dunn with D+K, architect of record. So I would like to speak to it being practicable. I'm going to look at it from a more holistic point of view. I know that Ben's here obviously from a tree and forestry standpoint. I know neighbors are here from a daylight and encroachment standpoint. I spoke about this a little bit in the first meeting. As the architect, I have multiple responsibilities. I've got, first and foremost, to my client, and what are they trying to accomplish? Obviously, it's their money, their home. Want to make sure that it adds value and increases the value of their life, and so not just monetary, but, you know, mentally and the rest of it. I have a stewardship to the property, and, you know, this was done by can I call him a famous architect? If I may be so bold. And, you know, they've already put a lot of money and time and care into the home, and we want to continue to bring it up to today's standards so that it can live for another 110 years. And then I do have a responsibility to the neighborhood and the community as a whole. And so what I'm trying to do is, as the architect, is balance all four of those. Is how can they get a rate of return and enjoyment on the home? How can we ensure that the home continues for another 100 years? And how do we not negatively impact the neighborhood and the community as a whole? And so I think everybody's got valid points here, but it's a matter of, okay, how do we look at that as a holistic? And so from a practicable standpoint, if we layer in the functionality of the house, and I think most people will concede that most homes are set up where, in an ideal world, it goes from garage to mudroom to kitchen to living space, and that just, it's done because it's the way we use the home. You know, we've got our coats on this time of year, we got bags, groceries, all that. It's great to take the coat and the shoes off in the mudroom, drop the groceries, go to the home. And, they're both real estate agents that can speak to the value of that beyond just the use of the home, but the financial side of it. Secondarily, we want to put on a two-car garage, as it's already been stated. They've got 2 electric cars. For those of us who don't have them, I've found out from them that if you don't have a semi-tempered space in the really cold days, you can't charge the car, it won't hold the charge. So we shouldn't hold against them that they're, helping save our planet and not having combustion engines. And I would argue in today's world, a 24 by 24 garage is the minimum size. And then the last thing is, we've got the office space. And so there's a couple things that we're trying to achieve with the office space. One is we need increased living space for a growing family. They both work from home, so they need some semi-private space so they can do the breakouts when they need to when they're working. And then the last one is, and Charlie will speak to this later, he has parents who have mobility issues, and so from a safety standpoint, being able to have them stay in a space that's on the first floor is just, it's safe and good for their health. So back to practicable. So the alternate site plans that we see in the package were actually shown as examples of taking those 4 of the homeowner, stewardship for the building, the neighborhood, and the community as a whole. These were actually shown as cautionary tales of how we start to throw out of balance. So it will throw the homeowner's use out of balance because we're going to block views, we're going to start dividing the yard in half, which is going to reduce the usability because, look, I know if we create more space to the east, it creates a better buffer for the neighbors. The reality is that's at best a backyard for them, and it's going to be an underutilized space. The space at Front's Forest, however, is going to be their true usable yard where they're going to have the connection of indoor-outdoor. It's going to be beautifully landscaped, and the neighborhood and the community will be able to enjoy this yard because it's set back. There's going to be more buffer space. It's not going to be in their face. I think one of the things that we aren't taking into account is the existing structure currently encroaches on both front yards and the side yard. And so the buildable footprint on this piece of property is actually fairly limited because of the 2 40-foot setbacks. And then, the heritage tree just reduces that even further. And so if you start looking at that piece of the puzzle that's left over as a result of it, it really kind of locks you into a box. And so, and I know, Ben, we've had conversations about this of the merits of how far away do you need to be to really save the tree. The part that I struggle with is obviously we all want to keep the tree. It's a beautiful tree. We're going to try to keep the tree. We're here today to ask for the removal of it, but our intention is to not remove it, but we know to move forward, we've got to get the approval. I have firsthand knowledge, I talked about this in the last meeting. I built a house around that tree, and we did all the things. We had the arborist, we made sure we didn't compact the roots, we did all the things that we're supposed to do, and 3 years later, the tree was dead. Now I got a house that was shaped around a tree, no tree. So the reason why we showed this study was to show the impact of how the yards get divided, how it impacts, the neighborhood, and how it starts to encroach. And my fear is I respect the 20-foot dimension, but it's still a roll of the dice. And it's, nobody in this room can say for certain, if we're 10 feet away, 15 feet, 20 feet away, does it live, does it die? We don't know. We're not going to know until we dig. And then even then, we're not going to know for 3 to 5 years afterwards, because, some trees are fickle, some are not. It may survive, it may not. We all hope it does, but we don't know for sure. And so the 35-foot diagram was, and I think Ben probably agrees, is That's the distance that we need to be away to really say with certainty, there's a real high probability that tree survives. And obviously, the impact is quite substantial because now the addition is in the forest front yard. Ironically, now we have a very large yard that's really not as usable, and we're creating additional FAR space because we got to get there. We're blocking views from the existing house because now we're just looking at a wall. To me, it's just the only box that it'll check two boxes by moving the addition further away. It's better for the heritage tree, and I think we probably all agree that we're never going to get to the point where we can say with certainty that that heritage tree is going to survive, and then it helps the adjacent neighbors because we get further away. It negatively impacts their use and enjoyment of the house. It negatively impacts the stewardship of the property as a whole because, I mean, would you want to buy a house with a family room that has a wall 15 feet away from it? And then it negatively impacts the neighborhood as a whole and the community as a whole. And so, in my mind, that meets the definition of practicable, is yes, we can move the house away. We moved the portion that's next to the heritage tree an extra 3.5 feet away. We're now 16.5 feet off the property line, which is pretty significant. It'll improve the likelihood of saving the tree, or maybe not likelihood, but the chance of saving the tree. But we don't know if it moves the needle at all. It might not. Nobody in this room's going to know until after we're done. So I think it does meet the definition because of those four factors. It is a gray area. I mean, we can debate, 10 feet away, 15 feet away, 20 feet away. We can all debate it, but nobody in this room can say with certainty that any of that moves the needle. Did I answer?
Member Henry?
So, I guess the question I'm wondering is, thank you for your testimony, it was awesome. In terms of the holistic view, is it your opinion that the revised plan is as far west as you would want to go to check those boxes, the holistic plan?
It is, and I know,
In your opinion?
in my professional opinion, I think it's the fairest compromise, and as you can see with the diagram here, where the kind of that courtyard that's created where that 15-foot one dimension is, we're starting to encroach the addition into the family room view sightline, and that's not even taking into account the open air structure. We're conceding that, hey, that's an overlap, it's the best we can do. But in my opinion, the further we shift this thing down, the more it negatively impacts the property as a whole, their enjoyment, the neighborhood. Yeah, I'd prefer it to be about 4 feet further the other way, but I understand we start going into the setback, we get closer to the heritage tree, I get those things. So in my opinion, I think this is a reasonable and the right way to approach it, taking all those factors into account.
Thank you.
Member Yavon?
I had a similar question at our last meeting. I know you chose that side of the property because it's closer to the kitchen versus having it be on the other side of the property where the sunroom/living room is. But once again, to speak to the practical nature of it, and if everything was shifted, and so, yes, I understand that you'd have sunroom, living room, patio, and then a garage, but you would still have the big chunk of backyard, you'd still, so can you talk to that, please?
Yeah, you started to hint at some of why I would object to flipping those. I do think that the layout and the flow of the house would be impacted. Again, Lauren and Charlie could speak more to the real estate aspects of it. My wife is a real estate agent, so I hear all the time about funky layouts and why they don't sell, and so I kind of know secondhand why you wouldn't want to do that. I do think that has real impact to the usability of the house, both their enjoyment and then future residents. I do think it also splits the yards in half, and so when I look at their yard being a corner lot, while it restricts what we can do with the property, it does give them the advantage of the public way, and so their use and enjoyment of the property, they get that extra 15, 30 feet, whatever that is. Even though they don't own it, it's still perceived yard that they can use. And so when you flip them, you basically come up with 2 half yards instead of 1 side yard and 1 full yard. And then, again, from a neighborhood standpoint, if we flip it, we're now encroaching into the forest front yard, and I think that has a negative impact to the neighborhood as a whole. So is it doable? Yes, but we'd still be asking for variations. We'd be asking for different ones, and in my mind, again, we could debate the merits of the tree, right? As far as encroaching on FAR, which I would have to do the numbers to figure it out, and the rear yard lot coverage, I would trade rear yard lot coverage for a driveway over encroaching into a front yard all day long. That would have less impact on the neighborhood as a whole.
Thank you.
Vice Chair Beck?
I'm not 100% sure that we could do this procedurally, although I suspect we could. There's been representations made several times that every effort's going to be made to save the tree. So I'm wondering if we were to give you, or your clients, obviously, the permission to remove the tree, but kind of have it be contingent as a last resort, only if the tree couldn't be saved, that you would work with either your own arborist or in conjunction with the city arborist and making every effort, kind of putting your money where your mouth is, saying, yes, we are going to do everything we can possibly to save the tree. If it doesn't get saved, it doesn't get saved, obviously, but.
We would happily agree to that.
We'd happily agree to that. Okay. I think it's something you can do procedure.
I'm going to ask the forester to, because he raised his hand.
That question has come up a number of times, both in communications behind the scenes, and I think there's a significant liability in that much construction, that close to the tree, and the people that would be most affected by that liability are in this room. Because that tree it's in the setback of the property, and if you remove a good chunk of that root system from the west end of that tree, our westerly winds could take it out across the property line. So I would have very strong objection to preserving that tree with a foundation dug that close.
Would even make the attempt to do that?
Yeah, and I believe their arborist also provided testimony saying he would not be comfortable with encroachment less than, I believe, 50.
So just to be clear, so when you're saying that the liability is that if you made the attempt and it failed, the tree could fall and cause damage?
Depending on time of year, that is very possible.
Consideration, thank you.
Yes.
I'll also say that that's something that we would have to double check with Corporation Council to see if that's a submission that's possible.
Okay. Was that loud enough for you to hear it in your recording?
I hope so. I'll say it again. I'll have to double check with Corporation Council to make sure a condition like that is possible for an approval order.
Thank you.
And we do agree with what Ben's saying. We would want to have at least our arborist, if not have Ben come out as well, when we start, if we get approved, when we start excavating. Look, if there's primary roots there and there's a concern about safety, obviously that trumps all desires to keep the tree. We don't want to end up on the news for any bad reasons.
Is it fair to say that you would proceed that way whether we condition the order or not?
100%.
So I think the difference between the 20 feet and the original setback is about 8.5 feet or so, right? So on the original one, it's going to be a covered patio, right?
It is.
Okay, so there's going to be, there already is going to be some sort of like blocking of views already, right?
That is correct.
Okay, so just my question is this, how much of an impact would the 8.5 feet difference make to the view if there's already going to be a covered patio that's going to restrict that?
Well, so the way it's designed right now, there's at least a sight line through to the backyard. You're going to get more natural light in. The problem is as we shift over, it becomes a solid wall, and all of a sudden now instead of a view through, and yes, there is a roof above, but instead of a view through to the backyard, you're met with a wall. And so in an ideal world, we're not detrimentally affecting the existing house for the new addition. And that's something that we always try to, a lot of times you'll see these great new additions put on, and nobody lives in the old house, they only go in the addition. We want to make sure that the existing house is still viable. To Mark's comment of, you can have a 5,000 square foot house and only 2,500 square feet if it's really livable in today's standards. The family room right now it's got great light, it's beautiful. We want to be able to maintain the usability and the enjoyment of the house that we saved.
All right, thank you.
Did you look at other options where you would have your garage and maybe the garage is placed where the existing garage is, but then the new office/living space is like attached to the house or elsewhere?
So we looked at a whole bunch of different variations. We looked at detached garage, and some of this was with some of the proposals that the neighbor was sharing as far as, do you move it on the property? Do you do something detached? Just to speak to the detached portion of it, because I know there was one option of, well, do you attach the office to the garage and just put it in the rear yard? If we do that, I'm almost positive Highland Park does not allow a secondary detached structure that's not an accessory on the same property, because there could be an issue where you could have two dwelling units on one property, and then that opens up a whole can of worms that nobody probably wants to have to deal with, because there's a whole bunch of other legal stuff that all the attorneys will get up in arms about. And then we have to start dealing with, again, if you look at the box of where the buildable footprint is, I mean, we're really constricted where to fit it. And, our goal was, going back to the hardship of the non-heritage tree variances, is that we've got to prove that we've got a unique situation that isn't caused by ourselves, but is something that is unique to this property. And I think the two 40-foot front yard setbacks, and then the truncated rear yard as a result of it, is unique to this property. That, again, I spoke about this in the first meeting, that if this was an inline lot, we'd be within the setbacks, we'd get the bonus for the FAR, we wouldn't have a rear yard lot coverage issue, and let's just assume there was no heritage tree for the time being. This project could be built as of right, no variation. The one thing that we haven't spoke about specifically, or at least I haven't, is the neighbor's concern. And while they've got a valid concern for, they don't want to lose daylight, they don't want to lose shade, I guess I would probably ask, which one is it? Because the two kind of contradict each other. Are you concerned about the daylight or the shade? Because in the sun studies that we showed what the existing trees currently, how they shade the properties. We also showed what we could build as of right from the 12-foot setback line to 32 feet tall. We showed what we were proposing, and then we showed the delta between an 18-foot peak and a 16-foot peak. And I'll still argue, based on my expertise, a one-story addition with a 10-foot tall wall down at grade with a roof that slopes away from the property line, as Mark said, 28 and a half feet is where that ridge line is, it's 18 feet tall. I mean, it's about as reasonable and rational an addition you can put on, and now it's 16 and a half feet away from the property line. You got 40 to 60-foot trees, you got a 6-foot privacy fence. Yes, it will cast shadows on the adjacent property at certain hours of the day, but currently, the other property casts shadows on their property. So, it's one of those kind of give and takes. It's part of being in a neighborhood, right? And so I would say that this addition is very reasonable, and my concern is the alternates that were proposed are either going to require larger variations that have more of an impact on both this property and the neighborhood as a whole, that if we go back to the practicable statement, I think this solution is the one that is the right solution, taking all that into account, and all the other ones it's detrimental to basically everybody but them. And at that point, then you have to question, is that an argument of convenience? We're within the buildable setback lines. These setbacks were set as a global for the community, and they were done by city and regional planners of, based on this lot size, how far away should the buildings be from a property line? And what kind of FAR should you have, what kind of height is allowed. These are things that are looked on a much larger scale than two adjacent properties. And we respected that. We wanted to stay within that buildable footprint, and I think it's a reasonable proposal. That's,
Any other questions?
Yeah, can you just kind of walk us through that sun study and explain what everything means?
there's a lot of them in there. We wanted to cover everything. So basically what we did is we took both solstices and both equinoxes, and because obviously we could do every day of the year and for everybody. And essentially for each one of those, we started with spring, summer, fall, winter. The top one is the current conditions with the trees, because we wanted to show how the trees provide a whole lot more shade than what the proposed addition is going to be. The second row down is what we can build as of right within the buildable footprint. The third one down is what we're proposing today, which is going to be the one-story addition at grade with the peak that's 28 and a half feet away from the property line, 18 feet tall. And then the fourth row is, if we were to take the roof and bring it down 2 feet, what's the difference? And essentially, kind of like the site plan, the exercise of that is to show that when you look at the 18-foot, which is the third row, and the 16-foot, which is the fourth row, I would argue that I can't really tell the difference. I'd be surprised if anybody else can tell the difference of the impact of that 2 foot of roof structure. And so obviously, spring and summer, what we're showing is that the boxes on the left-hand side is when 162 is throwing shade at 178. And then the boxes on the right-hand side is vice versa when 178 is throwing shade onto 162. And as you can see, it's pretty split. Remember, third and fourth row is what we're talking about. First row is trees, second row is as of right. So those are just hypotheticals. The third row is the one we're proposing. And so again, there's 2 hours at the beginning and 2 hours at the end. We did run the study from 8 a.m. on 1 hour increments to 4 p.m. Obviously in the winter, sun's setting at that time. In the summer, it does stay up longer, but it's also higher in the sky. But yeah, we did it for each season. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so is the methodology that you used a generally accepted methodology within your field?
Yeah, so our drawings are done in a program called Revit. It's a 3D modeling program. And so what we do is we actually punch the coordinates in of where the property is, and then it automatically generates, you put in what day and time of the year, and it'll tell you exactly where the sun's at and what the shadow is. So it's all computer generated.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions? Yes.
Chair, I would like to clarify, in the beginning when asked about additional variations for legal notice for these alternate plans. So I would like to say that this porch, a covered porch is allowed to encroach up to 8 feet within a front yard in this situation, so this looks like this would be fine. A patio, if it's less than 2 feet in height, is allowed to encroach all the way up to 2 feet away from that property line, so they would be good on that end. This alternate plan would need an additional variation because that principal structure is going into the front yard.
And just to be clear, these are just showing the impact. These are not alternate plans.
Right.
Cautionary tales.
Yes. Do your clients wish to speak this evening?
Thank you.
Thank you. If you just so we have it on the recording, just give us your names.
Charlie Wood.
Hi, Lauren Wood.
Thank you. Floor is yours.
Do you want to start?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thank you again for all your time and energies and all of this. I think just generally speaking, it hasn't really been touched upon too much. Like, the whole idea of this has been to ease to get into the house. And our neighbors pointed out in their letters to the meeting tonight that, we knew this going in when we bought the house, right? And that's something that we thought we could help, enhance in the property. Getting into the house is extremely difficult. We've noticed our garage is the farthest away than any other house in the neighborhood. I actually fell down yesterday getting out of the house and out to the garage. It's very hard to get into the house. And I think that is really the point of this, is the start of this is all because of just the ease to get into the house. And as we said last time, we got a ticket because we sat in front of our house for too long, and we're not allowed to park right in front of our house. We have dogs, the kids on the way, parking on the other side of the street to bring in groceries with all that is challenging. So proposing the garage be moved to the western side of the property is making this even more challenging. And I think I said this last time, like the neighbors told us their nephew didn't buy the house because of the garage situation. So for our use and enjoyment, we need to get this garage closer to the house, and also for resale and as we're realtors, and we run a top team in Chicago, Cook County, and Lake County. I've been doing this for 20 years in my industry. I've never seen a garage in the middle of a yard. The whole reason we bought this house, one of the top priorities of moving was for a yard for our family. And putting a big structure right in the middle of your yard makes no sense for resale, for us, for the neighbors. If we move the building to the west side, there are 3 times the amount of trees on that side. They're not heritage trees, but if you look at the aerial view of our home, there's more trees on that side. Getting into the house through the sunroom or the patio to the family room, again, with children and dogs, doesn't make any sense to us. And I also, we worked with our landscapers on trying to devise a plan to pull a parking pad in the front. There was a heritage tree on that side too. So we're really locked in here. It's very hard to work with this property. We love the history of the house, and the size, it sounds like a big house for a young family at 4,500 square feet, but there's rooms that are not usable because they don't have heat in them. They're not heated or insulated, so that cuts off a portion of the house during certain times of the year. And also, as we've all heard, the closets were tiny wardrobes, and we took bedrooms and made them into closets, and you have to walk through other rooms to get to other rooms, and it's weird. And it's peculiar, and we're trying to make it less peculiar. And everyone who's walked by our house has said, thank you for maintaining the integrity of your home. Thank you for keeping the Howard Van Doren Shaw. We love what you've done. We've spent 6 figures on landscaping so far, and we have plans to spend another 5 figures on the side this year, and we'll continue to do more to beautify the property.
The eastern side, which will include 4 new trees this spring.
The western side.
Sorry, western.
That's kind of all I wanted to discuss tonight, and Charlie's going to talk more about why we're asking to build a little extra room on the property as well.
Hi there. Thank you all for being here. I think Corey touched on it, very appropriately when it comes to, a modern lifestyle and the needs of a family that works at home, that's expecting children, and having the need for extra workspaces. But for me, it really hits home because, as he touched upon, my father has Parkinson's. He had a hospital visit this fall that was precipitated specifically by a stairway incident. He was in town last week to get evaluated for brain surgery. He is getting brain stimulation done to hopefully improve it, but his care is here. He lives out of state. He's going to be coming into town for long stretches for that procedure and other doctor visits, as well as to visit his grandchild who's here in 2 months. And we want an appropriate ground floor space where he can spend the night. We don't have a ground floor bedroom. A lot of homes do in the area. We don't, and this is one opportunity for us to do that, to help make it a safe environment for family when they visit. So,
and then we'll close with, we've met with the neighbors at our house, and we chatted with them prior to the last meeting, and then we talked with them last night. They're lovely people. We like them a lot, and I think they like us too. But, we, as Corey eloquently said, we're trying to balance everything here, and I think Will mentioned, why can't we just impact our house and make the neighbors very happy? We'd love to do that, but I also just think that just for the neighborhood and all these other things, it's very hard to balance. So we're trying to be cognizant of all these things, and it's very challenging, but we've heard their light issues, and we too don't want to destroy the trees, but we can't come up with a better proposal than what we've come up with. So hopefully you grant us your request and we can all go on our merry way. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions for the applicants? Not seeing any. Are there other folks who would like to testify on this matter? If you'll please come up.
You'll need to swear me in. I was not here at the last meeting.
Okay, if you'll please provide your name and address for the record.
David Meek, office of 513 Central Avenue, Highland Park.
Thank you. Do you hereby affirm or attest that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Thank you. Nice to be in front of you all again. Welcome to the new member. Okay, just a couple of points. I know my clients filed a lengthy letter. I'm not going to go through all of that. I want to just talk about a few things. I think you're right to focus on the word practicable. As contrasted with practical, which is useful for the person who is the subject of the use of the word. Practicable is more about the property itself, whether it's feasible conceivably. Not that it's best, but it's conceivably feasible. And I think you've got to keep that in mind because there is legal significance to that. And we are, frankly, in a legal proceeding. I understand that the applicant has shown a plan to show the impacts of alternatives. And I understand they're saying that's not an alternative plan that they are going to embrace. But a couple of things I'd like to point out about that. One is, while the image that was shown up here, if we can bring up the one that shows the 20-foot setback from the tree. Yeah, the 20-foot radius. Could you just, hold it at that, please. Okay, hold it there. And they call out the limited side yard garden. But in fact, what they leave out here is the 80-foot right-of-way that is Forest Drive. And so this image, although in your packet I think it shows it better, this image does not show what is probably 30 feet or so to the curb from this property line. In other words, the property line goes down the middle of that yard. The 40-foot is measured from the property line. The yard, in fact, is much wider. And admittedly, there are a lot of city trees, Forrester mentioned, but this is a somewhat deceiving image with respect to the look and feel of the lot. And the look and feel of the lot and this concept of limited yard garden is really that anybody who has this lot has within their orbit of control and the appearance of the neighborhood this additional swath of land, which is incredibly wide. Most right-of-way is probably about 66 feet. This is an 80-foot right-of-way for some reason. Might have been a quarter at one point, but if you pull out the plat maps, Forest Drive is 80 foot wide. Right, so that's all that additional area that is a component of this property. So to talk about moving something into the middle of the yard, can't think of it, well, it's not quite accurate to say that. And I understand there is a balancing to be considered here of interests. There is a consideration of the neighbor's interest, but a prime issue in the first instance is the city policy on preservation of trees. And we've been through this before. I've been through it with you on Vine Avenue, where we had a situation, we had one tree in the middle of the lot, and they saved this one tree because there was a practicable, but less preferable to the developer, alternative of situating a house behind the tree in the back of the yard or in front of the tree. And he didn't like that. It wasn't his best economic interest for that. But the tree and the policy of tree preservation was observed to be of a significant importance. And this is a tree on the side, but it is a tree that the city has decided qualifies for some considered measures to try to protect its viability. And as we've heard testimony from the city arborist, there's really nothing short of at least 20-foot radius from the trunk that should be protected. Now, if I could, I don't think I can ask a question directly of the arborist, but I'd ask you to ask him the following question. Is the 20-foot measure, how is that measured? Is that measured to the ultimate edge of the building that is going to be created, or is that measured to the cut of the overdig for the foundation forms to be inserted. But it's kind of like that point of clarification. And also, is it measured from the perceived center of the tree, or is it from the exterior bark of the tree? If we could get a little bit of clarification, because it may go to what you may decide you want to recommend, and then I think we need some specificity as to, if they come back with a plan, what's the 20-foot measure supposed to be? So if you wouldn't mind seeing if that can be asked of the arborist, I'd appreciate that clarification.
Would the arborist please come up? Would you please explain how the 20-foot is measured and from what point?
The way I perceive that measurement being taken is from the trunk of the tree, not the perceived center, but the trunk of the tree, to where the foundation is intended to be, not including the overdig. That extra distance is to account for some accessibility during construction.
Thank you.
And I believe the arborist also indicated that the lateral route, the issue of, maybe belaboring a point, but the applicant said we're only digging 4 feet down. But I think just want to emphasize his point that there's lateral root structures within the first 24 inches that are important, both for the, I believe this is correct, I can be corrected, both for the, the lateral root structure, obviously for water, but also for structural support. And that was, I think, the arborist's point about if you destroy the integrity or impact significantly the integrity of that lateral root structure, you can precipitate potential failure of the tree. So, going to feasibility for a minute, the applicant has a couple of other zoning variances, and they're trying to establish a hardship case, and I think there's a lot of ways to establish the hardship. Slightly undersized lot for the district that it's in. It's a corner lot with 2 front yards. They've got a more constrained building envelope. But, as the planner pointed out, with a plan like this, that patio, 4 feet or more, could, without need for variance, be constructed. You'd still have a building within the footprint. You'd be asking for the same or similar FAR relief. And one thing you'd do is you actually reduce the amount of impervious coverage, because you'd be shifting the driveway a bit to the south. And so the stem of the driveway is somewhat shorter, and so the square footage, and potentially, I don't know, you'd reduce the amount of rear yard lot coverage by some percentage point, thus reducing the intensity of the variance that you needed. The granting of a protection to the tree with a, say, a 20-foot radius or greater, if that would be your pleasure, would achieve some measure of protection of my client's interest in the sunlight. And just for clarification, yes, they have interest in both the shade and the light. The shade in the summer from the overage of the tree, that's great. But in the winter, the tree coverage is gone. And so they'd like to get as much light in as they can in the lower winter months. And so to the extent that a building, by right can be built in that envelope, but respecting the tree, they like to see it kept as low as possible and as far away as possible. There's a trade-off to be made. They recognize that there's some plan that would work here. And there may be a plan that would work that doesn't require any variances and should just respect the heritage tree. But we do have to, I think, give some primacy to the tree. I mean, if you don't, it eviscerates the whole purpose of the tree preservation ordinance. You've got to remember the lengthy expression of intent and purpose and public policy of the ordinance itself. It is not just a question of whether there's a practicable alternative. There are other standards, mandatory standards to be met. They outlined those in the brief or the letter. Impact on reasonable use of the property, which kind of goes somewhat hand in glove with practicability. But you do have to be mindful always of the intent. And the intent, as we went through on the Vine case, is really to preserve as often as possible the trees. You had the case of the golf course on Edgewood Drive. You went through for days, hours, the standards of justification for each of the trees. You didn't take them as a group. You said, you've got to prove up to me that that can be taken down or not, and why, right? And you went through very considered, lengthy presentation, multiple nights, commend you for that. I think the same consideration should be given here, and I think when you do that, and when you hold fast to your duty with respect to the standards, you'll find that there is a way to achieve the interests of the Woods in expanding their home and making it livable and having a beautiful addition to their house that achieves in great measure what they're looking for. It may not be ideal, but it is a fair balance of the interests, of the neighbor's interests, of the city's interest in the preservation of the tree, and of their interest in having a fair use of their property. Thank you.
Any questions for Mr. Meeks? Vice Chair Bay.
Mr. Meek, I think we all agree that much of this is contingent upon our findings as to the heritage tree, and you've spent a lot of time speaking about that. Asking kind of hypothetically, I'm assuming that your clients would still oppose the other variations if we didn't have to deal with the heritage tree, if the tree wasn't there? Or is there a way of allocating, are they more concerned about the tree, are they more concerned about the other variations, or?
I can ask them to speak to that. I think that they probably don't have a concern about the rear yard coverage, because I think that they understand that the city, with respect to drainage, and that kind of pertains to the drainage impacts that have been expressed by them and I think others, that those impacts can be addressed through the engineering of the site design when they go in for permit. So, but I do want to acknowledge that I think that having more of a yard on the side and more impervious will contribute to less likelihood of drainage issues on neighboring properties. With respect to the variance for FAR, they can speak for themselves. It is not a great amount of variation, and it is otherwise within the bonus FAR that would be allowed if the bonus FAR were available. But, Frida, if you want to, I think you spoke last time, so you probably better swear.
Yes, I just need to speak my name.
Yes, please.
Parita Kanavsky.
Thank you.
Thank you. So again, thank you for your time. Thank you for your consideration. We really appreciate it, and we do appreciate our neighbors talking to us. We do like each other in spite of all of this. I just want to say that. Okay, so with that said, the question is, if the heritage tree wasn't in question, would we still have issues or concerns about the light? We do have concerns about the winter light and the seasonal, short season light. But would we have a bigger concern? The answer is no. We do understand that our neighbors have a property that they want to enjoy, just like we have a property we want to enjoy. And we have to respect that they need some things in their property. So we're willing and we're okay with some adjustment. We just don't want to lose all the trees, impact all the trees that the forester has noted in the packet, even though they could be impact, they couldn't be. But he's an expert. I'm an expert in IT and project management. When I say this timeline is impactful, I am an expert. He's an expert in trees. Who are we to say what probability is when he's telling you, when he knows the trees? This is his job. This is his passion. So we do need to listen to him, and we do need to understand the impact of this. But coming back to the question, the light question, it is impactful. Our design of the house, the windows placed, do have a massive impact on the western side of the property, thank you. But we are willing to give up something to come to a compromise, to come to a place where our neighbors can enjoy their property, we can enjoy our property, and have a good time. When we go over, we definitely want to just chill in the patio. We have no problems with that, right? But there's a balance. We need to find an equitable balance, and that's what we're going for here. And that's what we talked about even yesterday evening, right? So, yeah.
Question. How would you respond to the point, I think it was Mr. Lickman raised it, that if they were not willing to go through all these efforts to try and save this lovely old house, and they had just come in, knocked it down, and built something that would have arguably been a lot more impactful upon the neighborhood and the effect it would have being the next door neighbor to a new, taller, more volume structure. why isn't that a significant concern? Aren't you happy that they're trying to do something that's not going to impact you as much?
Sure, I think my attorney has a better answer.
I actually don't think that's really a fair comparison, because that's not the situation that's in front of us, and a new home on the site may or may not conform to zoning variances and may not need any relief, but for the heritage tree, right? In other words, there might be a new home that meets all the standards, respects the heritage tree, can go up to 32 feet, can be built to 12 feet. But if it's by right, there's no avenue for expressing to a board like this, that's of a board of review, a concern about it. And it is just, it's pulling a permit, it goes up, and you're like, oh man, I wish they'd talk to me about this, I'd like to see it, but I don't have something to look to. So I don't know that it's really a fair comparison to say, well, they're preserving the house, so we should give them credit. And by the way, that's not really a standard for review of either the heritage tree issue or the zoning relief that they're asking for.
I certainly agree that it's not for us, but I think it is a consideration in the sense that if they had knowledge that, and again, maybe I'm engaging in too many hypotheticals here, but if they had knowledge that because we weren't able to grant the relief requested, they ended up having to sell the property to someone who did come in, knock it down, do what they could do as a matter of right, wouldn't that be a worse situation for your clients?
I don't know what that would be designed. I can't say it, but I think Rita would like to answer that too.
Yeah. So I'm sure when they build or whatever they want to do and come back, do whatever they want to do on their land, if they were new owners, I'm sure there would be some sort of a thing that would have to come to the zoning board, and then we would have to have that discussion at that time. So maybe, maybe not, but there is a possibility. I don't know that, right? And even if they build something and it impacts us, again, that's not what we're here for. We're here for today. Who knows what the future is? I don't know if I'm going to be there in the future, but I do know I'm there today. And I know I want to enjoy my house today and tomorrow. That's all I can speak for. I don't know if anybody can speak for the future.
Fair enough, thank you.
Thank you.
Can I ask her a question?
You may address the board, and we'll ask her to hang by.
My question is you just said a minute ago that you may not be here, but are you aware that your lot is a triangular lot, and if you were to sell it, that...
Mr.
somebody
Lickman,
might
if you would
want to
address
leave?
the board, please.
Oh, okay. My question is that their lot, if you look at it, is a triangular shaped lot, okay? And who's ever coming before that, okay, they also have the same constraints that we have, but worse because of the way the lot slopes towards the street. So really, anything that's being built in this area is going to need some type of zoning relief.
It may or it may not. We do not have the building lines up there. So it is possible a creative architect could come in and build within the buildable zone.
That is true. And my other point is that if a builder did come, and since there are two 50-foot setbacks here, I would imagine that they would build a deep basement and that they would comply with all the zoning setbacks, and they would have enough of an envelope to build, but it would be farther back on the property and more compressed because they don't have those two, because of the two front yards. I do believe that this is the only practicable place to put this. As it relates to the city right-of-way, that is not my client's property, and those can be widened or, and I don't believe that it's 80 feet. But putting this addition in the middle of the yard really makes no sense for my client to do it. Now, there's the city policy of saving trees, and there's also the city policy of historic preservation and preserving old homes. And making this home so that it is a useful, and my clients can get a reasonable return out of it, and they have discussed that this is the best place where they have found to put it. The other thing that really, nobody's really talking about here is that this is barely a heritage tree, because it's at 30 inches, and if you look at the way that it's measured, okay, the one part of the rope, strike that, of the tape measure is a little bit higher than the other part. So it is, it is barely a heritage tree. And I don't think that, because some other heritage trees have been saved, I don't think that that's necessarily precedent right now. Because when I was on the zoning board, there were plenty of times that trees had to come down. But I will tell you that what was always trees that did get people sometimes more in arms than it was anything else. But, my client is going to do whatever they can do with the city and with their arborists to try to save these trees. And there's really only one tree that they have planned to move. As it relates to the impact of the sun, Corey Dunn, who's an experienced architect, did discuss and that there is very little impact because of the size of the addition. In fact, if there was something that could be built as a matter of right, it would be much taller. So this is actually a very good compromise for the neighbor. So I'm going to let Mr. Dunn finish this up. Is there anything you want to add?
Was there a question for me?
No.
Okay.
Can I have a follow-up directly to what was?
Yes, please.
And I'm sorry, I won't keep belaboring this, but two things. I don't think it's in controversy that this is a heritage tree. The applicant had admitted as much earlier in its own testimony, and I don't believe that the code distinguishes between a 30-inch heritage tree and a 60-inch heritage tree. A heritage tree is a heritage tree. It's deserving of the heritage tree protection. The other thing is that the attorney has said that his clients will do everything they can to save the trees, but the testimony of the only person here who, as my understanding, has any expertise in tree preservation is that you can't just say that. You have to take measures to do that, and the only way to reasonably assure the chance of saving the tree is to establish a significant enough buffer. And he is saying that while industry standard would tell you 1 inch per caliper, so that's a 30-foot, a reasonable amount in his mind could be 20 feet. And so I think that you have to take, since it's not been controverted by any other evidence, that 20-foot radius is really where you should be settling upon for a measure, because that is the arborist's determination of what is reasonable in this particular instance. Those are my only comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am. Would you like to come up? If you just remind us of your name, please.
Yes, Eleanor Bloom. I just want to say something about the trees. The trees protect the land and the water in the land, okay? And they hold the water down. And that back of the property goes around to our property. They have a triangular lot. We have a swale that the city put in before we moved in, that the water drains off into a drain. So by taking out trees, you are destroying some of the retention of that water. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you. Any other questions this evening?
I just want to, I was just looking at
Yes, Mr. Lickman.
at the tree survey, and this is a major problem here, and that is if you were to take this and draw a 20-foot semicircle around the tree, okay, there would be really no other place to build any part of the addition, unless it's in the center. And my clients, that's just not palatable to them. But this tree, which is number, I guess, 53, okay, it's not even 20 feet. It doesn't even look like it's 20 feet from where the neighbor's building is. So, you know, there is no practicable alternative here. So, did you want to add anything?
Yes, sir. Quick, please.
Just in regards to the distance away from the heritage tree, I just want to renew, I've done 900 projects over my career. 10 feet, 15 feet, 20 feet, it's a roll of the dice. There's no guarantee. Ben will agree that just we won't know until we know. I've done projects where 19 years ago in Highland Park, I did an addition where we were 5 feet away from 2 heritage trees. They both survived. That is an unlikely scenario, but it did happen. I've taken more measures and had trees not survive. Ben knows more about trees and arborists than I do. I'm just basing this on real-life experience and firsthand knowledge. We can all sit here and debate the percentages. The reality is it's a roll of the dice. And my last concern is, I get the arguments that are being placed here. Obviously, everybody's trying to play nice in the sand. I'm just concerned that there's a slippery slope of allowing neighbors to design other properties and using this board as a vehicle to do that. I know that, you know, obviously we don't deal in precedences here, but it could be a slippery slope. Just my 2 cents.
Very briefly, assuming that we were to grant you the ability to go ahead and you were to try to save the tree, how would you address the arborist's concern, or the forester's concern about doing whatever you do to save the tree, but the tree starts to fail? How would you protect the liability of the tree actually falling over?
Sure. So there's a couple things that we can do. First and foremost, we can insist that the excavator excavates from the east side of the property west, if I'm saying that correctly. Basically, we're not going to let them excavate on the side where the heritage tree is. We'll make them excavate, start where the heritage tree is and work their way away from it. That way they're not driving heavy equipment on it. We will need to overdig a couple feet because that's just logistics of putting a foundation in. We have done projects before that have been in the neighborhood of heritage trees. What we can do is we can hand dig when we're closest to it. The reality is we may come into substantial roots as we start to dig and negatively impact it. We would need to have the arborist on site when we're doing that excavation so that we can have a professional advise. Are we getting into a danger area? Are we not? Are we safe? And I would assume you guys would be on board with having them present when the excavation would happen. And we can mitigate keeping the machinery both under the root system and digging in the immediate, I'll call it the red area, you know, the most concern. So, you know, we can definitely take some measures to help our chances. Again, no guarantee, but do the best we can.
You believe you'd be able to be in a position where you'd ever be able to know if the thing was going to start to topple over in anticipation of, you know, preventing any damage?
I can't guarantee it. I can tell you there's projects where we've had similar situations before, and there was one project where the arborist said, hey, we got to call this, it's unsound, and basically we had a tree service on hand, well, on call, and had them take it down the next day. So no guarantees, but yes, there is processes in place that we can do to help ensure safety or increase the likelihood of safety. I guess I probably can't guarantee anything.
Do you think that's doable, Ben, where they could proceed safely with adequate precaution to try to save it and not have cause damage?
I can't attest to that, no. There has been, in my 7 years working for the forestry section in Highland Park, there's been one project where they've worked in very close proximity to a heritage tree and it survived. You go there today and it's got significant dieback. The only reason that project was okayed to proceed forward is because they did extensive exploratory excavation prior to the start of construction, and no structural roots were found. That is the only guise by which they received permits. And that is the only example I can think of to this day.
Can I ask a procedural question, though?
Please.
Okay. If we approve everything, the structure is built, they have not torn down the tree,
Right.
a year and a day goes by, or 2 years, or 3 years, and it's determined the tree has started to die, it's not in a good condition.
Right.
And they need to take it down, do they need to come back to this board to get permission to take down the dying heritage tree?
If it's dead, dying, diseased, or hazardous, no.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. I'll be real quick. In response to the architect, 2 points. He said it's a roll of dice, 10, 15, 20 feet. Well, that kind of eviscerates the whole purpose of this. Shouldn't we be guided by the expert here and not take the chance? I mean, I think it's probably intellectually pretty clear that it's more likely to harm the tree if you're 10 feet than it is if you're 20 feet. I think that's probably a fair statement. And then to the point about the slippery slope of letting neighbors design. Well, yeah, I mean, the neighbors have an interest in the heritage tree. The neighbors also have other interests in light, et cetera, but they recognize there's parameters they can build in. But that's the nature of variances. If I'm going to ask for a variance to encroach in the side yard, my design, my desire to have something is encroaching on my neighbor. I might be able to substantiate it. I might be able to show a hardship that legally gets me there, but everybody's kind of pushing and pulling on what they can do. So I don't know that it's really true that this becomes a slippery slope, that if you grant this preservation of the tree, that's letting the neighbors design. They made a proposition to do something. There's a rule in place. It protects trees, and you're trying to find the balance of how much of the protection to increase, to have the better likelihood than not that the tree will survive. Understanding that it could be 35 feet away and there might be an impact that could hurt the tree, but 10, 15 feet is from the arborist, more likely than not to harm the tree. And he's just told you that in 7 years here, this one tree where they tried everything they thought they could to save it, and it died. It didn't work. So that should tell you, I think, that you need to not allow this so close, that you have to go through those extraordinary measures, because even there, it's probably, well, that was just an example, anecdotal, but I think it's suggestive of the fact that something that's broader is better. That's it. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, I will begin with Member Hendrick.
So there's a couple of things I want to touch on. I don't think that my position has changed since the last meeting. I think public policy is not this board's. We're not elected officials. We did not write the law. If the law should be changed, it's a matter of opinion. People vote on those people to change them. It's certainly not my job to do it. So I'm using the standards as they are presented to me on this day. So even if I think that the weighing of interests and I come out maybe on the side of, maybe it does make the most sense, maybe that to me is not relevant because it's not a standard. It's a mandatory standard that's given to me. So my position hasn't moved. There's a couple of things I want to say. To me, the size and whether it's barely a heritage tree or not is literally irrelevant. If you're 21, you're 21 and you have certain rights. There's no place in the law that ever says if you barely qualify as something, then the rules change for you. That's not what's going on here. Mr. Don, a lot of what you said is persuasive, and I appreciate your testimony. One thing that you did say at one point, maybe by mistake, was you said, is it doable? Yes. To me, that's the problem. It is, if it's doable, yes, that's the problem. And, I hadn't even thought about maybe some of the more out-of-the-box ideas, like redoing the garage away and then attaching like an office space to the sunroom. The more I keep thinking about it, and it didn't make sense to keep going back and forth with you, it just seemed like there were a plethora of other doable options. Maybe not preferable, but doable. And I can't get over that. The last thing I want to say to everyone involved, precedent in our board is irrelevant, and Mr. Dunn said this at the end. So whether we protected trees in some cases or given variations in others, credit to you for listening to the golf course situation. We look at everything de novo, and that's true in this case too. So, that's where I'm currently at.
Thank you. Member Beck?
So I agree with pretty much everything Member Hendricks said. There are, in my opinion, practicable alternatives that can be done here. I mean, it seems like the arborists, there are guidelines. We're all talking about probabilities that, there's no guarantees, but there's guidelines. And we're already pushing the guidelines. The city forester says, well, it should be 30 feet, but I could live with 20. So, I guess the applicant, I think, would need to come and, make some concessions at that point to do other practicable alternatives to get this job done. That said, I'd be much more open to other variances that they would need to do those other alternatives, given the fact that they were going to preserve this heritage tree. So I don't think the standards are met, so I would not support the heritage tree application.
Thank you. Member Yablon?
Okay, first I'm going to go with the thank yous. Thank you to the forester for being here. I know it's a late night and you start early, so thank you. We really appreciate your presence. Also, thank you to the Woods. Thank you for buying a beautiful old home and trying to work within it. I, once again, know personally that that's challenging, and I appreciate someone moving into the community that has the same values. That being said, unfortunately, when it comes to mandatory findings, there isn't wiggle room. And I do think that there are, as my fellow members have said, practicable alternatives. So with that in mind, no, I would not be in favor of this project, and I'm sorry to the people involved. And, I'd also like to thank Mr. Dunn. You gave a masterful presentation, and thank you for answering all of our follow-up questions.
Member Krashansky?
All right, so I have a little bit of a different take here. I understand we're supposed to apply the law. Going back to law school, it reminds me of law school. I'm not a strict constructionist. I think you have to obviously read the law, but you also have to take into consideration other things like human elements, things like that. Mr. Meek, when he was referring to practicable, he mentioned feasible, which I think is a synonym of practicable. I think workable is also kind of a synonym of those. And when I think of workable, I think of capable of producing the desired effect. And I think it's pretty clear what the desired effect of this renovation is to the Woods. And if we were not to grant this, well, let me put it this way. Their proposal is the only practicable way that I see it being done, and the only practicable way is what they presented, and it produces the desired effect. So that's how I'm getting there. I find it to be practicable, and that's how I get there, okay? Not a strict constructionist. I looked into it, and even though Mr. Meek was very persuasive, the writing's incredibly persuasive, I just interpret things differently than others. So because I am okay with granting the variance with respect to the heritage tree, I am overall in favor of this project.
Thank you. Vice Chair Bay?
Thank you, Chair. I think currently I am the second longest sitting member of this board, and I can honestly say I don't think I've ever had a case. I've been on, for, I don't know, 6, 7 years now. Some people might say too long, but thank you. But I've literally never had a case where I've flipped so many times in my mind into which way I'm thinking, oh, I'm sure I'm going to decide this way, I'm sure I want to decide this way. I'm generally, along with Will, a strict constructionist, but I also agree to a certain extent with the new member whose last name I can't comfortably pronounce quite yet, but I'll get there, that I think you do need to look at a balancing act here. And I think while clearly the preservation of heritage trees is an important policy consideration for Highland Park, so is the preservation of historic houses, and the encouraging, to keep, it's part of what makes Highland Park, Highland Park. So I'm still kind of vacillating a little bit. I think the actual zoning variations are very much in keeping with the standards. I don't have any problem with approving those. So it really comes down to the heritage tree and how much I'm willing to sway from being a strict constructionist, because I've said it before, I don't believe that the word practicable has that much flexibility, and I'm not sure that it really meets it if we are as strict as we have to be or can be in using the word practicable in this mandatory finding. However, I said it last week, I really think this is a wonderful idea for the use of the land. I think people have the right to be able to do what they want within reason without affecting others, to enjoy their house, especially the situation you've mentioned with family concerns and first floor living and all that good stuff. So I'm still a little bit torn, but if I'm going to make a mistake, I would probably err on the side of favoring the proposal at this point.
Thank you.
Sure.
Make my life more difficult. I really, really, really want to get there, okay? Let me just, first, I want to thank everybody. I think everybody has done a great job, and I always have trouble with heritage trees. And the golf course one, you had to bring up the nightmare case. You may just regret it. No. With regards to the variances regarding the rear lot coverage and the FAR, all that, you've met that. So it really does become an issue of, you need 4 votes, we'll just remind everybody. It really does come down to that practicable. And because of the fact that the applicant has provided other potential alternatives, I'm really torn, because I really like what you did on this one, because it tells me you listened to us and your neighbors regarding trying to get the part near near the tree further away by taking off, that one little white box. But I do keep coming back with, are there other alternatives either that were presented this evening or which are a potential that haven't been considered, which are practicable alternatives? And because Mr. Bay normally does this, practicable is capable of being done, effective or put into practice with the available means, or feasible, capable of being used, or designed or constructed for actual use, a practicable window, a practicable water faucets. So I unfortunately, with as much as I'd like to get there, I think that there are, and it has been presented, practicable alternatives to get to that 20-foot line from the tree. And therefore, I would be voting against the permission to cut down the heritage tree. So with that, I guess I'll ask,
Do they get the option for continuance at this point?
they do, but I'm going to ask our students if they have any, 1 minute, Mr. Lickman. Do either of our students have anything they'd like to say? Just so everyone understands, our student reps are ex officio members, and they're free to speak their mind.
Do you want to start?
Sure, yeah. Yeah, I think that, you know, this is like something that, you know, would make the home a lot more livable, and, you know, certainly what you guys have said, certainly would add to that, but I am concerned about the tree, and, you know, I'm not sure whether 20 feet would make it so that, you know, it sort of defeats the purpose of the addition. But, you know, at the same time, with how it is right now, you know, it's possible the tree could not survive, and I really don't think that we should, like, disregard the tree. But, you know, I think that the project is important for, you know, livability and all that, but, you know, I think we still have to consider the tree, so, I think maybe if there's, like, the chair was talking about, if there's other practicable alternatives that would consider both the tree and also consider, you know, that you're still gonna have a yard and it's still, you know, it doesn't defeat the whole purpose of the project, that would be something we could look at, but I'm really not in favor of necessarily cutting down the tree, but I think the project is a good idea that would make the home more livable.
Yeah, I can just add on to that. I think how Member Hendrick phrased it was perfect. That I think that the way we go through this with the variation request is that they admitted that there's other ways to go through with this, and that I get that it's more practical and easier for the one they have, what they have now, but if there's other ways to do it, then that has to be considered, and I get you can't have both, but I think that for me, what Member Hendrick said pretty much put it perfectly.
Thank you. So with that, Mr. Lickman. Yes. We will recess for 5 minutes.
Conlaw flashbacks. Four corners, baby, four corners.
We'll look to see if there's any other options that work for them.
Okay, thank you.
So can we continue this?
Yes, to date certain. What's the next meeting and the one after that? Do you have
I
a-
can't make it to the next meeting.
Okay, so
I can make it
Kelsey?
sometime in March.
Let me pull that up right now. Sorry, Chair, give me one moment. Okay, so the next meeting in February is the 16th, and then it's March 2nd and March 16th.
Is March 2nd doable?
This March 2nd, her due date is coming up very soon after that, so.
Okay,
Okay.
so March 2nd.
Okay, so I'll entertain a motion to continue this to
I'll
March
make a motion
2nd.
to continue this matter until the meeting scheduled for March 2nd of this year.
Member Hendrick would second that motion.
Kelsey, can we get a roll call, please?
Okay, Member Trusansky?
Aye.
Member Beck?
Aye.
Member Yeblon?
Aye.
Member Hendrick?
Aye.
Vice Chair Bay?
Aye.
Chair Pullizer?
Aye,
Okay, that is 6, the motion passes.
thank you. That brings us to new business. There is none. Kelsey, is there a staff report this evening?
Yes, so the next meeting is February 16th. We have one case on the agenda. It's 68 Ridge Road, and it's a front yard established building setback variation.
Thank you. Anything miscellaneous from anybody?
I would just say thank you to the minute taker for updating the minutes. I appreciated it.
That was me. Thank you.
Oh. Okay, thank you, Kelsey.
And thanks again to the Forester for staying this late.
Yes, thank you, Ben.
Yes, thank you. In that case, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Motion by Vice Chair Bay, second by Member Beck. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, we are adjourned at 9:50.